Hello! How is everybody doing today? We are back. Somehow I have actually kept a schedule. I'm actually very, very surprised that I managed to pull off a consistent thing. Overall, I mean, it's definitely an every other week situation right now. I honestly thought I was only going to do one a month. I'm actually pretty happy that I feel I have enough topics to talk about, and I feel I feel like I have the time and the availability to be able to pull it off twice a month. So that is definitely my goal. Currently, it is every other Saturday at 4 p.m. Central Time, as that is the time zone I am in. But overall, yeah, I think it's going to be sitting pretty well. This week, I did not actually set up any guests to be to be here as well, just because it's one of those things where as I'm starting off, it's one of those things where you just don't want to be a burden on people and you don't want to bother people, and it's such a stupid thing to have in your head and feel, because everybody's trying to do things like this now. Everybody's trying to start off and start their own businesses, and friends, I've got so many friends that are doing art projects or are streaming, and I want to support them as much as I can. And so that's really the big things. I just need to reach out more, need to just be open and honest with people. So that's definitely a downfall on my part for this show. But the benefit to not having a guest on this episode of the podcast is I get to talk about a show or a TV series that I really, really enjoy. And I don't think I've ever found another person in my life other than I used to watch it with my uncle. That's how we found the show. But I don't think there's ever been anybody else in my life that has watched this show or just gotten into it at all. I don't think I know anybody who's watched a single full episode. So that's definitely something that I wouldn't have gotten to do this topic until either far, far in the future, when I find somebody online who has watched the show and I'm able to talk with them in detail about it. But I figured, why not just get to it right now? I want to keep a schedule, but I didn't get a guest ready. So I thought, you know what? Instead of taking a topic that I have so many friends and just so many different people in my life that would be able to talk about all these great shows and movies and music and video games and books, just talk about something that I enjoy. Just me. I don't like and that's the thing too, is it's a show that it's not that it doesn't have a following. I just don't know anybody that enjoys it or that's watched it. So the series that I'm talking about today is called The Tribe. The Tribe is a series from New Zealand that started in 1999. I probably found the show around the time of it ending, I think. Maybe it was maybe still running at the time when it started airing over here on Wham, I believe is the channel name. But it was honestly probably finished by the time I ever actually got to watch the first episode of it. But I remember finding the show on a channel called Wham. That was a strange show from what I remember, strange channel from what I remember, because it was geared towards children, is what it was labeled as. But it had this entire anime block later on in the evening that had shows like Van Dread, and I think it had a couple of other like grittier ones as well, but like not shows for children. So I don't actually know what their idea for everything was, and I think it was primarily a matter of these are like kid and teen drama shows that were brought over from other countries, and kind of this is where they were played on the US. So I remember watching The Tribe on there, and I believe the other show that I found on there was Higher Ground, which I don't think I will ever do a full show on Higher Ground, and it's been a long time since I watched that show. But if you like Hayden Christensen, it's definitely a show I would recommend watching. I remember it being pretty decent. I just don't remember the details. Overall, the show Higher Ground was about a bunch of like teens who couldn't deal with their stuff and got sent off to a mountain climbing camp. Really weird. The Tribe is in that same vein of you're watching a bunch of kids and teenagers having to deal. The show went for so the Tribe went for 5 seasons or series as they call them in New Zealand, and it stopped airing. But even with 5 seasons in, at I think each season was 52 episodes apiece. The last season maybe was a little bit less, but it was essentially a soap opera for kids and teens. So it was a very, very highly serialized show, very, very character driven. And the creator, Ray Thompson, has talked a lot about how this show was geared towards children. I don't know if he's ever really talked about the details as to why he went through and wanted to make a kid's show about such a dark topic. And I'll get to the premise of the show in a bit here. But it was honestly really interesting. And I mean, I suppose it's hard to gear a show like that towards adults and not towards children, just because all of the actors in the show were kids and teens, and a majority of them, I believe some were older and things like that, like the kids that were playing 16, 17 were probably in their 18, 19, 20s when they started. But honestly, some of them might not have been. I recently saw some footage of a very early, essentially all of the cast members meeting and doing like a photo shoot, and they all looked so incredibly young. Even more so, obviously, than when the show officially aired, because I know it was in production for about a year before it went on the air or anything like that. It was in pre-production for I think 6 to 8 months, then post-production for like 6 months. So it was definitely a long start to it. Something that's really cool about that actually is the first season of the show. So a majority of this show takes place in a mall. I believe it's called the Phoenix Mall. I don't think it has ever been called that on the show, but I was reading up on it a little bit and doing some digging for details, and they called it the Phoenix Mall. But at the time of this show starting, they built this permanent set for the TV show because they knew it was going to be at minimum 52 episodes. They had already planned that out. They had a whole story going. I think the original deal was for a couple of seasons, and they kept adding on. I don't know exactly how that whole thing panned out, but they built this giant mall as a full set. They said they had like 100, 150 or so workers pretty much working around the clock for like 2 or 3 weeks to build it. And it shows like it's a full building. It's really cool to see what they were able to do with it. Obviously it's a kids show, and so they're not putting in terms of the rest of the like special effects and things like that, they're not putting everything they have into it. It's other than that, I think it's a fairly small budget compared to what you would expect in like an American show. I mean, it's akin to any soap opera you'd see over here. On top of the 5 seasons that they had with 52 episodes each, they have actually gotten 3 book series since the show ended in like 2004, 2005-ish. Or I guess 3 books, not 3 book series, but they've gotten 3 books that have been written on that around 4 to 5 years apart each time. I've not actually gotten around to reading those yet, but they do take place after the fact. And something that's really cool about these books is the fans have still put so much dedication and time into this series, even 15 years after it's been off the air, that they were actually in talks for a while, and one of the reasons the 3rd book took so long to get released is they were in talks of potentially making a movie. I believe they were talking with like Hollywood producers and directors and getting them involved in shooting something in America where they'd have a larger budget. But it just eventually fell through, so they finished off the 3rd book and released it that way. But something that's really cool with those books is that they're releasing audiobooks finally. And from my understanding, a good chunk of the cast members have come in to record audio for it because they're all in it. And so that's something that's really, really cool. A lot of these cast members were kids when they started this, and so not all of them necessarily wanted to be actors. Not all of them knew what they wanted to do for their full career or anything like that. And there's a lot of people that either don't act anymore or just do it as a smaller side project. You've got a few directors, you've got a few musicians. So there's obviously plenty of people in that that field of entertainment. But it's been really cool to see just how they all kind of have been able to go on and do what they want. I know one of them owns like a landscaping company, and that's something that's really cool as well. Is the creator Ray Thompson has been doing a podcast over the pandemic. I don't know if he's still doing it, but I know he started it around the March, February time when everything kind of started to shut down for us, at least. They didn't shut down right away, I know, when everything happened, but obviously, as we've seen from New Zealand, they took care of a good portion of their pandemic pretty quickly by just, listening. And so that was something that was really cool to see, is getting to kind of watch, or at least listen to them dealing with the same pandemic while we were doing it ourselves. And so you get to listen to some of the cast members, and then Ray himself talk about the weirdness of it and going into lockdown, and then how it kind of made them look back at the show. So this is where we're going to really get into the crux of what the show was. The show was a series about a virus, this deadly virus that seemingly came out of nowhere over the span of, I think, 2 to 3 months, if even quite that long. All of the adults in the world, essentially anybody, I believe they said over 18. I don't know if they ever fully specified the dates, but essentially anybody over the age of 18 started to get sick and then go into the hospital and then die. And they couldn't find an antidote, they couldn't find a vaccine, and in the course of literal weeks and months, children were left to figure out society. And so the show starts off, I think, around 6 months into this weird pandemic where these tribes have taken over the city. The primary section of the show takes place over the city. Major scenes are a hotel and the mall, where the main tribe that the show focuses on, the mall rats, call home. As the show opens up, you see children running through the streets. You see a group of older kids in a police car driving around, screaming about anarchy and power and chaos, and just it's a frightening and scary scene for anybody who's like any child watching that would be terrified. And one thing that I think this show does so well throughout it is it really puts it in the lens of these children and these teens, and you watch them try to emulate what adults do. You watch them try to emulate what society should be. And it's not all of them that do that. There's multiple different groups, there's multiple different tribes that act very, very differently. And so you get to watch how all these different political parties or power struggles would take place in a scenario where there isn't anything already built. You've watched the world crumble, everything is gone, and it's genuinely just people making up rules. So as these kids go out into the world and try to figure out how to be themselves, they're also struggling with the concern of what happens when we get older. Like, these are like some of them are like 10, 12 years old, struggling with the idea of where do we go? Like they tackle pretty early on that the virus can affect them as well. So that was something that was really interesting with the series, is the virus is always looming over them in multiple different ways. As the show started off, it was, it's only the adults, it affected them. Now we're going to work on rebuilding society. You've got multiple people, and even inside the Mallrats, you've got people that want the chaos and want the power struggle because they just want to have all the power. They don't want to listen. They want full control. And then you've got the people who are trying to make a democratic society they want rules, they want regulations, they want laws. And throughout the first season, you watch that struggle constantly happen. You watch the chaos of somebody trying to say, well, they did this wrong, I can do this better. Now we're going to, like, I'm going to take over. If you guys all follow me, we'll be fine. And so they deal with things like death and betrayal because people do die in the show kind of frequently. Not always main characters. A large majority of the main characters stay for a lot of the show, but there's some, there's a decent amount from the first season that don't make it to season 5, and it's to be expected in a show like this where it's a bunch of teens and kids who are just trying to survive. Very early on, you are introduced to a character named Zoot. Zoot, obviously not his given name, is a just power-hungry madman. And by that I mean he's a kid who is scared. He is truly terrified. And it shows you how somebody like a crazy dictator can be seen as this savior, this godlike figure. Because when the show starts off, you see him as the leader of the Locos. He is just violent and brutal, and he wants power and chaos. He doesn't want full control as much as he just wants to watch the world burn. He is done with society. He watched it collapse and crumble around him. His parents died from the virus, and he watched it happen, and he cracked under that pressure. He dies very early on in that series. I think in the first 5 to 10 episodes. He comes to the mall. He's trying to get to this woman named Trudy, who is pregnant at the beginning of the show. And it is his child, and his brother Bray is protecting her from him and from the rest of the tribes. As this progresses through, he tries to break into the mall. One of my favorite characters, who is not a good person, and rewatching the show last year really reiterated that. Lex ends up killing him, ends up pushing him over the railing, and he falls and dies. And very early on, you learn that Lex has these small moments where it almost looks like he's remorseful, but has shown over and over again that he's just not going to be a good person. And it's one of those things that it's hard to watch somebody fail over and over again, and the people around them say, no, but they're trying to be better. And you get so many different aspects of life and people's different characters throughout this show, because they aren't all just one-dimensional. They do all end up living lives. And there's definitely some characters in this series that are very bland, very, very boring. But overall, you get deep connections throughout all of them. You end up seeing them change as the world changes alongside them. And you watch them go through those struggles that really break people. But along with Zoot's death, you don't really see it until I believe season 3 is when they come back, or when he starts to come back into the storyline, or maybe late season 2. But Zoot somehow instilled this idea of chaos and power being the ultimate way to live. It was fend for yourself, nothing else matters. Like, this is my will, this is my way. And somehow he instilled this idea into a group of people who just kept getting larger and larger, and they became a legitimate quote unquote religion. Typically you'd call them a cult, but I genuinely don't see it being any different than a standard religion in a section like that. Like, it was something that you watched build, and they had some kind of rules and regulations that kind of came in place, but overall it was just about power and chaos. There was somebody at the helm of it, kind of leading and directing somewhat, But overall, it was one person is getting these ideas from a god and getting messages and spreading it throughout. And you watch them enslave this entire city of people. It was such a crazy and unique thing that you just don't get to see in a series that's set in a modern society. Like there's some, like, no matter what happens, there's some outside force that could come at any time and stop them. And we almost see that in this series, as there's a group called the Technos that appear. But throughout this series, one of the main issues is that people don't have power. People don't have electricity or clean water or food. They are scrounging for cans left in shopping malls. They are scrounging for whatever they can find. There's some people that live on the outskirts of the city who have farms, and that's something that they start to do, I think, towards the end of season 1, early season 2, is they build up this farm. They get a collective of people from the city, and they manage to make it work where they're managing the farm, bringing food back to the city, and they're able to work around all of that and make that happen. There is a character in the show called Jack, who is supposed to be some sort of like technical genius, essentially. His abilities throughout the series vary quite a lot, and it's kind of nonsensical at times as to what he's able to do and why he's able to figure this out. But at the beginning of the show, there is another character named Dao who is essentially a prodigy engineer. He is, I think he's supposed to be around like 13 or so, and his parents were engineers, and so he learned a lot of stuff from them. And Jack is more the technological side of things. And so between the two of them, they're able to actually provide power and clean water to them all. And this is another one of those things that becomes a big power struggle throughout the first couple seasons of the show, is when other tribes around the city learn of these things, they want it. Or Lex wants to wield it over people. He doesn't think some of the younger children, even in the mall rats, should get access to some of these things, or people should get more food if they're stronger, and all these stupid ideas that every single time a new society is formed, you watch these things happen. We're seeing it in America now. I mean, there's so many of these weird conversations and arguments that people shouldn't get food, people shouldn't have a place to live, people shouldn't have money. Like, if somebody works a 40-hour job, they shouldn't make $15 an hour, because that's not what children should make. Like, none of these things seem to make any sense, but to some people that's their ideals, that's what they believe. And in a society that's actively functioning and has a democratic process, however messed up that democratic process can be, there's not much that happens with it. It's just a conversation. It's just people talking on Facebook or people talking on Twitter. Like, you're watching people have these conversations, but it's not like it affects what happens. In this, you're watching these conversations, and that's the political discussion. That's the discourse right there. You're watching them argue and fight, sometimes physically, mostly just verbally and mentally. And it can make or break what happens throughout the course of the show. And you're watching people die, you're watching people struggle to survive, and you're watching the biggest aspect was when the virus started to spread again in season 1 throughout the children's, and you watch them age exponentially. Like, they would just get 20 years older overnight. They had to talk about who gets the vaccines, who gets this antidote. And it's something that we are actively dealing with right now in America. We are currently talking about who is getting vaccines first for COVID. It's a discussion that essentially has to be had because we don't have enough, but we're not involved in that conversation. It's something that's can be construed as good, it's something that could be construed as bad. I can very easily understand both sides of it. If you have every single person talking, nobody's talking anymore. It's yelling, it's screaming, everybody's trying to talk over each other. People who are afraid to speak out aren't being heard. People who are angry and just don't have any fears of yelling and screaming are going to be heard the most. But is their opinion the most valid just because they're angry? It's hard to have a fully open democracy, as much as I prefer that idea over some of what we have. And so you watch that exact scenario happen. Granted, it's definitely less people in a city versus an entire country or multiple countries. But you watch that discussion happen right in front of your eyes, and it's really, really interesting to watch. And even though it is a children's show, they tackle these tough conversations and tough topics. You watch like people try to sexually assault people. You are watching straight up murder. You are watching enslavement. Like this show brings these topics up in a way that is somehow very easy to understand, and they do a very good job of kind of showing you both sides of a lot of these topics. Like with the religious cult aspect of things, you can see certain people throughout that organization who have lost that faith in their religion. They don't believe that Zoot is all powerful and is a god. But they saw the lack of control that was throughout the world, and even though their entire ideal is supposed to be power and chaos, he sees what they're doing as a way to help control the world. They are bringing people in, they're regulating work, they are sending people to work at these specific areas, and it's helping to maintain some of the peace. And less people are dying, they're able to control how much food goes to who. And so he justifies his actions as it's better for the greater good. He's been involved in situations that have led to deaths, but in his eyes, it's for the greater good. And it's the same kind of thing when you look at going to war. There's so many people that justify these murders and deaths by, well, it was for the greater good. And it's one of those topics that they just don't explore in children's media. Like when you talk about what is my child gonna listen to or watch, you look at cartoons and you look at fun, happy music, and we're not setting children up to become adults. It's just not something we're doing, at the very least here in America as a society. We're not setting people up to be an adult. And I think this show is a really good example of what happens when you don't do that. You watch children try to imitate and mimic what they have gone through and what they've seen their parents or family or just government do. And it just doesn't work when you are thrown into it without practice and study and teaching. And when you look at what's happening, they're just not getting people prepared, whether it's educationally or emotionally. I think is the big thing that we're seeing with such a large spike of how many people in this world we have versus how many we had, say, 50, 70-ish years ago. Like, we have over doubled in size, and that takes a toll on people. There's so many people in this world that you're constantly looking at what everybody else is doing. And I think it's hard to sit back and reflect on what you're doing or what is best to do. You as a child, you learn from mimicking, whether it's the people near you or the people you see on TV, which is so prevalent now. And I think that's just something that we just need to sit down and talk about more often, is how are people feeling? What's right? What's wrong? What do you think? What do you believe? And it's something that we should be having conversations with our children at younger ages, not waiting until they're 25 years old and a full person, quote unquote. Like make them look at the world around them and prepare them. Like I can very easily say that when I moved out of my house when I was still in high school, I was not prepared. I managed, and I still manage today, but at no point do I feel like I was prepared for anything. You just live. And there's no way to prepare anybody for everything that happens. But I think just having those conversations so they understand that that's normal. Like that's the thing, is everybody is still learning, everybody is still moving. It's just normal. Back to the topic of the show and how these kind of things relate is you, like, as we said before with the virus, the virus is kind of a looming topic throughout the entire show. But after that initial scare of, oh, we can get it too, and then they figure out essentially how to make that antidote, which they figure out because they go to some government buildings around the city, and they're able to find a government facility that they have to leave the city for. They have to go on this essentially multiple mile long journey, and they find I think it's called Eagle Mountain, and they find a facility there. They get some information. They essentially find out that the adults created it. They were trying to essentially stop disease. They were trying, I believe, initially it's supposed to be some sort of like essentially cure-all or cure for cancer type of situation. And typically that's where a lot of these things end up, is trying to stop things that are happening naturally will eventually lead to unnatural things. And they have to then struggle again with, not only was this not just a random happenstance, this was created. Like, yes, it wasn't intentional, but it was created by the people that were supposed to be protecting them, by the people that were supposed to know better. And they were able to come to terms with that eventually, but it's something that constantly was a struggle throughout. And it was just, again, one of those things that was really, really interesting to watch, and just something that you can't really see in a normal TV show. Like, I truly feel like this was a unique experience that I'm sure there's something like it, and I'm sure there's something that has done it better, because the acting in this show, very, very simple. You're dealing with a bunch of children who are not professional actors for the most part, but it just tells stories that you don't get pretty much anywhere else, or at least that I've seen. I've seen the series about 3, maybe 4 times all the way through in my lifetime, and primarily when I was in like middle school or so. I rewatched it, as I believe I said earlier, last year, kind of right before the pandemic hit. I think I finished it before we actually went into quarantine, which was kind of strange, because it brought up some of those like ideas and memories of watching the show and looking at, like, what if something like this were to happen? And it's something that's so, like, at no point in my life had I ever thought something like this could actually happen. And it's definitely on a much, much smaller scale. It's still a large scale, but it just, it really was like, yeah, we're going into lockdown. We are getting all this misinformation, which is another big thing for this show, because what's one thing the government is never going to do when they make a mistake? Admit it. And they hid everything away. They said it's a natural disease. They're working on a vaccine, and just all these different things that we see happening. And it's so crazy to just watch this thing that you've seen on TV for years and always kind of thought is this fantastical idea of like, how crazy is this? And then just watch it kind of come true in, again, very small way, but it was genuinely scary for a moment. But as the time goes past, there are things that are definitely darker than I remember in the show. There's also things that you're looking at, you're like, yes, these are for children. And it's just so interesting to watch it through multiple lenses. And so it's something that I like, that I was able to see it at a young age. And I feel like anybody who goes out that's in their like late 20s and past probably won't be that interested in this show. At the very least, not unless they like young adult novels and young adult dramas, which I do happen to love, but probably because of things like this. But it's something that I think can be so useful, and I think it's something that is actually very easily watched with a family, and it's something that I think would be very easy to watch as a episode here or there, or maybe 3-episode arcs and things like that. It's not something I would recommend trying to spend a week watching, because it's like 250 episodes. It's a lot of episodes, and it can be a lot. And the acting, as I said previously, is not always the best, and the effects are not that great. Like it's a show for children, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have great aspects. Looking at something like Clone Wars, for that matter, that's a children's show, but they don't shy away from death and anger and political issues. Like I like that there's media out there that isn't saying, hey, you're a child, here's funny haha laugh joke. Like, I like my media to have multiple things in it. I like it to have action and drama and comedy and emotion, and I like it to feel full. I like it to give me multiple things. I want it to be happy, but I also want it to be sad. I want both sides of that. And the show, in my opinion, does a very, very good job of that throughout the series. Again, there's definitely cringy moments. The fight choreography in this show. The fight choreography in this show is bad. It's very, very bad. At least through a majority of the show. There's definitely some that are okay-ish, but a vast majority of the fight choreography is very, very bad. So if that's something that's important to you, skip it. But overall, good. They've got major battles that take place for reasons, but again, it's a bunch of kids. They don't know what they're doing. They're running around pushing people and punching. Like, it's lame. They do a decent job of bringing in some different backgrounds and ideas when it comes to the characters' ideologies, which I think is really interesting. Like, the character Tai San, at the very least at the beginning of the series, is very, very much a love everyone, try to make sure that everybody gets what they need, and I need this right now, and is very open about like physicality, emotional, whatever is needed for a person right now, they need. It's something that can be done. As the series progresses, she gets tainted by a lot of these things, and you watch her character change as well in not necessarily good ways, as some of the other characters change for the better. And it's something that I think they did a really good job with as well, is making some, like, in the end, I feel like most of the characters ended up in a middle ground. They showed compromise. They showed how, essentially, to survive this, not necessarily one person is correct, not necessarily one person is wrong. They need to work together. They need to become an actual unified tribe, and they need to treat people as people, not something that can be used to move a point. And one way they do that is everybody has their own strengths, everybody has their weaknesses. They go through that throughout the entire series, and you watch people fail. You watch, again, people die. Like, mistakes were made throughout the entire series, and they have consequences. Not always. Certain characters get off with a lot more than they need to, or should. That's a point I would like to make for Lex is he should not have been allowed to have made it to season 5. I like the character a lot, and I think he was a very fun and at times interesting character. But he does too many things too early on that should not have allowed him to continue on, and he gets to keep going. So overall, there's definitely some mistakes there, but I think they were able to eventually use that in a better light. Yeah, it's dark. I want to kind of skip ahead here a little bit because I went through a general premise for season one in terms of it's them dealing with the new society, figuring out what they want to do, getting the virus, finding the vaccine. As they move into season two, they are dealing with building up a democracy, and as that democracy is kind of starting to come together, and as the tribes are working together, that is when we really start to see the issue of the that big religious cult come in. And as they come in and take over, there's a real power struggle in terms of how that's going to manage itself. As they're kind of on their way out, that's when the technos arrive. And the technos have a very interesting arrival for a series with very little, at that point, virtually no technology other than the mall rats. Like, the mall rats have power. They figured out how it works. They were able to build generators. They have power in the mall. They've got batteries, so they play like Game Boy type scenarios. They've got like one computer that they use, and they manage. But nobody else has anything. The technos arrive. They do a very similar thing to the religious cult here, and they take over. They enforce rules. They enforce regulations, but they turn back on the power. This is a group of people who are obsessed with technology and have been for their entire lives, and they have the plans to the city. They find the power grids. They turn this on. The way that they act and the way that they make this sound is this is not the first city they've done this to. They don't really go into what they've done in the past, but from my understanding, this is not the first city that they've done this to. And it brings in another one of my favorite characters who is also not really a great person, which maybe this is saying something about me, but Ram. I'm forgetting his last name, but the character, that the actor's name is Tom. And I want to say like Hayne or something like that, but he's really interesting, and he does some music now, and I believe he directs as well now, but he's an interesting person. And his character is in a wheelchair. He is very germophobic. He is very, very narcissistic. He's such a strange individual, and especially in contrast from so many of the other characters that have been throughout the show, because you're seeing all these people that have just managed in society and is struggling to keep up. They're not really washing. Everybody in the show has such a unique style in they're constantly doing like tribal face markings, and everybody has interesting haircuts, and the clothes are all just kind of mishmashes of stuff, and they're just doing what they want, which is another one of my favorite parts of the show. Is the style is really interesting because everybody just has their own unique style, because it's not like there's fashion magazines telling you what to wear, and I love that aspect of it. But with Ram, he comes in, he has all of his people wearing these black and red, like rubber leatherish material, like jumpsuits essentially, and they're uniformed. They are a militia, and he is clean. He's a very clean person. He uses a computer to do everything. They get the power running. They start building up this game. And what they do with this game is to get people to work, they get them addicted to this virtual reality video game. And as this virtual reality world and video game are coming built up, they start giving people for wages, they start giving them these game cards. And it gets them addicted, and then they want to work more. And there's certain people throughout the city, especially in the mall rats, that are like, hey, nobody play this game. Like, they're using us. And it's another one of those things that's very interesting to watch as people struggle with things like addiction. And they actually even touch on addiction for like alcohol and drugs and things like that in the series as well. But just doing it with a different style in terms of watching them go through this struggle with technology after not having it for, I think at this point, probably almost 2, maybe 3 years. And just watching the struggle of, well, it's just fun. Like, why can't I do this? And watching people try to make things work in minimalist ideals, watching people struggle with just the fact of like, I need all of this all the time. And this is one of the few things that I don't actually like about the show, is the entire kind of overarching theme as the series goes on is very much, we need to get back to nature. We need to kind of ignore all of the worldly possession style living that we do. And I can understand some of that. I can definitely get how we're putting too much emphasis on technology. I mean, I have 3 monitors in front of me, a microphone, like there's camera, like there's constantly so much technology. While doing this, I have then looked at a smaller 4th screen that I have towards the ground on my phone. Like there's so much technology, and I would be entirely lying to you if I didn't say I was addicted to technology. I love technology. I don't like nature. And that's the one downfall I have of the show, is I'm not a huge fan of that message entirely, because I like using technology and I think it has so many benefits. But at the same time, I definitely see so much of the downfall, and I can greatly understand where that comes from. So that's one of the few things that I just like on with the series, is the overarching theme is not my personal ideals and ideology, but overall, I like a lot of the message still. So the Technos end up being a very major force for, I think, seasons 3 through 5, at least seasons 4. Right? They're a very major force for the rest of the series, essentially. And you watch a power struggle with Ram and essentially a nameless person for a majority of the season that he was in at the beginning. And then he takes over and just has a different style, but still that same kind of like, we want to control. And so it's very much just watching the same kind of struggle happen while society is trying to rebuild. And you're watching different people try to build society in a way that they see fit. And it doesn't really work for anybody. It's not really working for the democratic process. It's not really working for people trying to completely take control. And it's eventually you kind of start to see people live happier, just more fulfilled lives when they're living in these smaller tribes, when they deal with their power struggle from a small group of people. They enjoy themselves, but can go out and talk with other people. They essentially just build these large families throughout the city and throughout the country. And everybody seems to do better when it's just in those situations. Whenever you see a large group of people show up, it's never a good thing in the show. And that's something that I think can very easily maybe just be something that is seen as an ideal from like a New Zealand point of view. I'm not entirely sure, being from America, but overall they're a smaller group of people. They are on an island, essentially. Granted, it's large in terms of the size versus like a small island, but I can imagine how anytime to them a large group of people goes anywhere, it never looks good. It never ends well. It's always somebody trying to get more power, more money, whatever the situation is. It's never not a bad thing. And so yeah, it's just one of those things that you can watch, relate to society very very easily, but also its own thing. It's just one of those things that I don't think we'll see often. It's a very unique series, and I'm really, really happy that I found the show when I was younger, and I really want to pass this show on to more people because I think it's a very interesting series that I think had this weird magic to it that I feel like so many people missed. But like I said before, it has a very large following. It has books written about it. there's actually a video game being made. I believe it's like a turn-based RPG style, like a very old, like Super Nintendo looking graphics style turn RPG. So like a old like Final Fantasy 3 style, and the character creation portion of it, from what I've seen, is actually really, really cool. Because again, one of the best things about that series was the style, the uniqueness of it, how many options, like you would look at one background character and it would look completely different from the background characters all around them. And it's not just one person looks different, everybody looks different. You definitely have some similarities here and there, especially between tribes, with the exception of the mall rats kind of being their own exception because it's a conglomerate of tribes. Essentially everybody who's an outcast kind of shows up at their doorstep and takes over. But watching people create their own characters in there, put their own face like face marks on, and their own hairstyle, like you can control like the back side of the hair, the front side of the hair, do different colors on like either side of it, the outfit styles. It's really interesting, and I do hope it ends up being good. It's definitely not a very high budget game, or it's not going to be any sort of like big release, but for the people that enjoy the series, it's something that I think will be really cool and will eventually be fun to play. I don't believe it has been released yet. I believe it's still in production. I don't think they have any like alpha or beta to try out, but from what I've seen, it looks interesting. And that's just the thing, is this show constantly has people talking about it. It constantly has people that are interested in it and love the show and are looking for more content. Those 3 books that are coming out, or the 3 books that are out, I believe the first one might be available for audiobook already, or at the very least they've finished recording it, and they are planning on recording the other 2 books and releasing those all. I believe now you can get them on digital formats. They used to only have them on physical copies, but I believe I think all 3 now are on digital formats. The game, I believe, is just going to be a PC thing once it releases. And the show, for anybody who does want to watch the show or take a look at it at the very least, it is now available on Amazon. I believe it is available on Amazon I know for sure in America. One second here. I believe it's available in America on Amazon. I want to say Germany has a release on Amazon, and I believe there was at least one other country, because I know they were posting about it online for a while about like, hey, it's now available here. So I know there's definitely availability to watch it and watch it legally, not having to pirate something or find some expensive DVD copy from the early 2000s or something random that's being ported over, and you have to find a DVD player that can play it, although I believe all Blu-ray players have the same DVD formats now. But yeah, it's really nice that it's now accessible. It wasn't for a very long time, and I remember having a hard time finding it. I believe they've got some of the stuff up on the Tribe official YouTube channel as well, and so that's really nice that they have it available to kind of get you into it on there. I don't believe they have the whole show on there, but I think they might have a few episodes in like sectioned off parts, and then they also have a bunch of behind the scenes stuff. So they've got stuff about individual characters, they've got stuff about production, and then I believe some stuff about Ray, the creator, as well. There was another, I keep forgetting his name, but there was 2 people that were involved with creating the series, but Ray Thompson is kind of known to be the main person as far as I'm aware. A fun fact actually about the show that I remember after rewatching it recently was in, I want to say it's season 4, maybe season 5, there is actually an appearance by Taika Waititi as a pretty random side character who appears in an episode. I don't know if he did any other work on the series other than just the one like random appearance, but him and I believe another bigger director were in it as well. And he's just a really fun, interesting guy who's from New Zealand, so that's why he ended up getting involved in this production, because Cloud9 is a fairly large production company as far as I'm aware over there. They ended up doing some spin-off of the series that I have not watched, that I believe takes place afterwards. I believe it's supposed to be like 15 or so years later, and it's a whole new tribe, a whole new area. They are kind of surviving in the forest, and they're kind of living, I believe, more of that life that the show is kind of aimed to be showing to create. So they're kind of living in nature, not in the city, and kind of surviving off of that. And it's something that they go back and forth on in the show throughout, but overall, I like that they're able to show multiple sides to it. That's really the biggest takeaway that I have from the show overall, and I can't stress this enough, is they're constantly showing you multiple sides. They're constantly showing you multiple takes. I don't think at any one point they are 100% this is right, this is wrong. And don't get me wrong, there's a large group of characters that will say something is right or wrong, and they will believe that. But throughout a lot of it, you're getting multiple sides of everything. You're seeing why somebody could do this or why somebody could believe this, and it's just a unique perspective that I think is really interesting and nice for kids to be able to see. I think it's really cool to see different aspects and to see different ideas. That's really the main reason I like it, is just how much thought goes into it, how much uniqueness is in it, and it's just not like other shows I've seen. It's definitely very soap opera-y, very serialized, very much character driven, as I said earlier, and that's really what it is. It's about these characters living in this weird and strange time, and I think it's something that throughout this quarantine is kind of a interesting and good show to watch right now, watching just a different perspective of a very weird situation that nobody thought we'd be going through. And even though our quarantine is much different and not hey, everybody has died, there's definitely some similarities. And it's one thing I take away rewatching the show right before everything happened is, as we live through this last year, it makes me think about this made up fake place and think that there must be somewhere out in society where they listened right away, they didn't go out, they managed to stay away from the airborne disease. And I like to think there's a small society somewhere that is still thriving, and after a year, 5 years, whatever it ended up being for them to get out of that mess, I like to think that they were able to come out, still be fine and alive, and have some adults there. Like I like to think that somewhere there had to have been somebody that listened, because that's something we saw with this, is a place like New Zealand where everybody stopped. The government right away was like, hey, we need everybody to stay inside, we need everybody to like mask up, here is like an amount of money to survive and pay your rent on. They were able to get out right away. I think it was like 8 weeks of quarantine or 10 weeks. It was not all that long. It was much shorter than pretty much anywhere else. And I just like to think that somewhere out there's a New Zealand for us, but or New Zealand for them there. But yeah, overall, just kind of final thoughts about the show again. It's really good. It is really weird. There are a lot of interesting characters on the show. Ebony and Amber are both such an interesting duo throughout the series, because they are both so headstrong and so just determined in their ideals, but they very rarely agree on what is the correct action to take. And so you get to watch two people constantly go at it. There's multiple characters throughout the series that are at odds with each other, but it's a lot of fun to watch. I would say give it a try. The first few episodes, I think, set up the show pretty well. You're not, like, anything you see in the first 10 episodes, you're not going to get a crazy like increase in production quality in terms of acting or sets in the next 4 seasons. So if it's something you just can't watch because it's old and outdated and the acting is children, don't watch it. But overall, I would say give it a shot. I think it's a lot of fun, and it shows some really interesting sides of society. Both what we currently are as a society, and both what we very easily could be. So, yeah, I think that is where I'm going to wrap it up today. Just going to do an hour with myself here. I'm very sure that I could find another hour of content to talk about on this show, but I already feel like I need to bring down the length of the episodes, and so this is a very good start, trying to kind of wrap things up in a short, concise way. But thank you very much for coming to the live show. I am going to be putting this up on all of the major platforms. I believe I still do not have it up on Apple Music yet. I need to figure that one out, but it is live on Google. It is on Spotify, Anchor, and there's a few other ones that I know it's on as well as the video recording will be up on YouTube shortly as well. I imagine those should be up probably on Monday. Yeah, you can get a hold of me on my Twitch on here, YouTube account, my Twitter. I'll have all of those in the show notes of the show, and there should be a link to the Twitter in the Twitch bio, as well as I will have links on all of those platforms as well. You can find me on all of those platforms, including Instagram at TheOnlyNeeb, TheOnly N33b, except for on Instagram where it is NIEB, because for some reason they won't give me numbers.